You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
When a grieving family moves into a quiet farmhouse on the edge of a forgotten property line, they uncover more than just sorrow. They awaken a spirit long buried and long forgotten. The Witch Behind the Wall is a chilling, emotional, supernatural thriller about loss, love, and the lingering power of unresolved grief. Inspired by classic ghost stories with a modern twist, this story will keep you listening long after the final whisper fades. As ancient secrets resurface and the line between past and present begins to blur, the Wallaces must confront not only what haunts their land, but what haunts their hearts. This is a tale of healing through horror, and the voices we carry, even in silence. If you enjoy haunting tales filled with heart, mystery, and the unexpected, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss what waits in the shadows. More true-feeling fiction drops every week. And remember, some ghosts don't want to scare you. They just don't want to be forgotten. Lily pressed her forehead against the cool glass of her bedroom window, staring out at the sprawling fields beyond their farmhouse. Twilight draped the world in purple shadows. The old stone wall that edged their property was barely visible, just a jagged outline cutting through the tall grass. Beyond it lay the neighbour's land. Lily could just make out the crooked silhouette of Agnes Brewster's dilapidated farmhouse in the distance. A single light burned in one window like a lonely star. Inside Lily's room, the air was stale. She hadn't opened the window in weeks. Summer's humidity had given way to a damp autumn chill. The faint scent of dust and lingering perfume, her mother's from earlier that evening, clung to the curtains. Downstairs, the pipes groaned as the ancient radiator struggled to life, bringing a minimal warmth to the house. Lily sighed and rubbed the sleeve of her sweater across the fog her breath left on the glass. Today had been another quiet day. Too quiet. Since Dad died, time seemed to move differently here, heavy and sluggish like wading through molasses. The rural stillness that once felt peaceful now felt oppressive. She scanned the yard, illuminated dimly by the rising moon. The barn stood to the left, its door slightly ajar where Ben had forgotten to latch it earlier. The gentle sway of the door in the breeze made a soft thump-thump that set Lily's nerves on edge. Every sound in the dark felt amplified. She swallowed, her mouth dry, and looked again toward the stone wall. A figure stood there. Lily's heart skipped. At first, she thought it was just one of the twisted oak trees that grew along the wall, but it moved. A definite shape, thin, human-like, hovered near the boundary between their property and Agnes's. Lily squinted, pressing against the glass. The figure was on their side of the wall, crouching or hunched. It looked small. Could it be a child? Or just a trick of the light? Her fingers trembled as she reached to switch off her lamp. Darkness flooded the room, making it easier to see outside. Now the figure was clearer against the faint moonlight. It was a woman, maybe. The silhouette of a flowing dress or long hair fluttering. She, for Lily felt sure it was a she, seemed to be digging at the base of the wall, scrabbling at the dirt and stones. Lily's throat tightened. A cold prickle crept over her skin that wasn't just the chill of the room. She wanted to call out, but something in the back of her mind warned her to stay silent, to stay hidden. She watched in morbid fascination. Suddenly the figure stopped digging and straightened. Lily's breath caught in her chest. The woman's head turned slowly as if sensing she was being watched. Even from a distance, Lily felt pinned by that unseen gaze. The shadows concealed the face, but Lily imagined hollow eyes scanning the farmhouse. Then, with jerky, unnatural movements, the figure clambered up and over the wall, disappearing to the other side, onto Agnes Brewster's property. Lily realized she'd been holding her breath only when her lungs began to ache. She exhaled shakily. Who on earth was that? It couldn't have been Agnes. Their neighbour was well into her 70s and walked with a cane. This figure seemed spry, if oddly contorted, and why digging at the wall? Her hands felt clammy. She wiped them on her jeans and glanced at the clock by her bedside. 11:07 p.m. Ben was likely still downstairs, maybe in the living room, and Mom had gone to bed hours ago, retreating early as she often did nowadays. Lily chewed her lip. Should she wake Mom? No. Julia had been sleeping so little lately that Lily hated to disturb her over something that might be nothing more than her own imagination. Maybe she should tell Ben instead. She turned from the window and silently opened her bedroom door. The hallway light was off, but an orange glow flickered from the stairwell, probably the TV still on in the living room. That meant Ben was definitely awake. He often fell asleep on the couch with some old movie playing to keep him company through the insomnia. Tiptoeing down the stairs, Lily tried to avoid the spots that creaked. The house was old, with floorboards that groaned and sighed like an old person shifting in their sleep. As she descended, a wave of warmth from the living room's radiator replaced the chill from her room. It brought with it the smell of something burnt. Ben's attempt at microwave popcorn, maybe. Ben? Lily called softly as she reached the bottom, her voice barely above a whisper. She found her brother sprawled on the couch, one arm over his eyes, the television painting pale blue light on the walls. A half-eaten bowl of popcorn sat on the coffee table. Some B-grade horror flick was playing, a slasher film with lots of screaming. He lifted his arm slightly at the sound of her voice, blinking at her in the dim light. "Hey, Lil, what are you doing up?" Ben's voice was rough with fatigue. I saw something," she said, feeling a little foolish now. The living room felt normal. The TV, the slightly too warm air, the soft sofa cushions under her as she perched on the edge. What she saw outside now felt distant and uncertain. Ben sat up, concern awakening in his eyes despite the dark circles beneath them. "Saw what? Another raccoon getting into the trash?" He tried to muster a teasing smirk, but Lily could tell he was genuinely curious. She shook her head, ponytail swishing. "No, a person. I think maybe a woman, by the stone wall." That got his attention. Ben leaned forward, grabbing the remote to pause the movie. On the screen, a masked killer froze mid-chase. He lowered the volume, and the sudden quiet was punctuated by the soft ticking of the cuckoo clock on the wall and the distant whistle of wind through the window frames. A person? At this hour? Where exactly? Ben's brows furrowed. Lily pointed in the direction, though the gesture was pointless indoors. Out by the old wall, kind of near where it meets the oak tree. Ben frowned. Agnes's side? No, on our side. Then she climbed over to Agnes's side. I don't think it was Agnes. It looked younger, maybe a woman in a dress or something. He ran a hand through his tousled brown hair, a gesture Lily recognized as uncertainty. "There's no one around here for miles, Lil. Not walking around at night. Maybe someone passing through got lost?" Lily shrugged helplessly. It sounded so unlikely. They lived at the end of a long dirt road. Their nearest neighbour besides Agnes Brewster was a 10-minute drive. You didn't just wander out here on foot. She was digging at the ground by the wall, Lily added quietly. Digging? Like an animal? No, definitely digging with her hands. It freaked me out, the way she moved. Ben stood up, grabbing a flashlight from the shelf by the door. Lily felt a jolt of both relief and apprehension as he headed to the mudroom to slip on boots. "Let's go check it out." "What now?" Lily whispered, a spike of fear in her voice. The idea of going out there into the dark where that figure had been moments ago made her stomach flip. "You said someone was out there on our property. If it's some creep, I want to know." Ben's jaw set in that stubborn way that meant he wouldn't be easily dissuaded. At 17, Ben had taken on a protective role since Dad died. Sometimes it was comforting. Other times, like now, it was alarming. He pushed a coat into Lily's arms. "Put that on and get your boots." Lily obeyed, her fingers fumbling as she pulled on the coat over her pajamas and laced up her boots. Her heart thudded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. She kept imagining the woman's silhouette, the strange, contorted angle of her limbs as she moved. Ben opened the back door and the hush of the night spilled in, along with a gust of cold air that carried the smell of damp earth and the last fallen leaves decaying in the grass. Lily pulled the coat tighter around herself. She briefly wished she'd grabbed Dad's old flashlight from the kitchen drawer. His was brighter, a heavy-duty maglite that could double as a club. But maybe it was fitting that they carried Ben's light. Dad's things had a way of not working anymore. Like his truck that sat rusting in the barn, which no mechanic could figure out after the accident, or the old radio that played only static since he left. It was as if some subtle curse had settled over anything connected to him. They stepped onto the porch. The wood planks creaked under their weight. Lily held her breath to listen. The night was alive with a chorus of crickets and an occasional hoot of an owl, but otherwise all seemed still. The figure was nowhere to be seen now. Ben clicked on the flashlight, the beam cutting a stark tunnel of light through the darkness. Moths fluttered briefly in its path. He descended the porch steps and Lily followed, careful to avoid the squeaky third step that always announced her presence during late-night snack runs. They crossed the yard, boots crunching on frost-tipped grass. The beam bobbed in front of them with Ben's steps. He swept it left and right. The pale light skittered over the hulking shape of their barn and the fence posts lining the property edge. Lily's eyes were locked on the low stone wall ahead, an old boundary marker that had likely been there for 100 years, piled knee-high with flat field stones, now mossy and dislodged in places. When they got within a few yards, Ben held up his hand for Lily to stop. He played the flashlight over the wall and the gnarled roots of the oak that loomed beside it. The tree's branches clawed at the sky, leafless fingers scratching at the stars. Lily could see the area where she'd seen the figure digging. The earth did look disturbed. Dark, freshly turned soil marred the otherwise undisturbed carpet of summer's dead grass. "See that?" she whispered, pointing. Ben nodded and approached cautiously. Lily stayed just a step behind, nearly bumping into him when he halted. He knelt and examined the ground. The flashlight's beam revealed clumps of earth and a scattering of small stones that had been pried loose from the wall. "She really was digging," Ben murmured. He sounded perplexed. He reached down and lifted something pale and long from the ground. For a heart-stopping moment, Lily thought it was a bone. She almost gasped, but as he turned it in the light, she realized it was an old tree root, half rotted and torn from the soil. "I guess she could have been digging this out," Ben said slowly. He stood and shone the light at the wall itself. Some of the stones looked like they'd been pushed aside or toppled. There was a narrow gap now, perhaps just wide enough for a small animal to squeeze through. The beam illuminated the other side briefly, Agnes's field, overgrown and wild, stretching into the darkness. Nothing moved there. Lily felt simultaneously relieved and uneasy. Relieved that they hadn't found something worse, like a grave, but uneasy at the confirmation that she hadn't imagined the whole thing. Someone really was out here. Ben pursed his lips. "Let's check on Agnes," he said abruptly, swinging his light across the wall toward the old Brewster place. Lily could see the faint outline of the farmhouse roof and the solitary window light, now obscured by a swaying branch. "Shouldn't we just call the police if we think someone's creeping around?" Lily asked, hugging herself. The cold was seeping through her thin pajama pants. Ben was already stepping over the low wall, careful to avoid the loose stones. "And tell them what? That we saw a strange lady digging? They'll think we're pranking or crazy. Besides, it might have been Agnes herself. Maybe she lost something." At this hour? Lily doubted it, but she didn't argue further. She scrambled over the wall after him. On Agnes's side, the ground sloped gently down. Here the oak's exposed roots were thick, forming natural steps. The siblings navigated around them, heading toward the Brewster house. They had only been to Agnes Brewster's property a handful of times, mostly to help Dad with chores when he was alive, repairing the old fence that separated their lands, or once when they delivered a fruit basket around Christmas as a goodwill gesture. Agnes wasn't unfriendly exactly, but she was reclusive. She had lived there alone for as long as anyone in town remembered. Some said she had a sister who died young, but Agnes never spoke of family. The tall grass dragged at Lily's legs as they approached the house. It was a 2-story farmhouse even older than their own, paint peeled to grey shreds, windows dark except for that one light on the ground floor. As they got closer, Lily could see it was the kitchen window glowing warm yellow. Suddenly, an eerie sensation prickled through Lily's bones, like they were being watched. She darted a glance around them. The shadows under the trees and around the barn felt alive. The wind rustled the grass, and something that might have been a whisper sighed in the distance. She sped up to stay close to Ben. They mounted the creaky porch of Agnes's house. Ben hesitated, then knocked firmly on the weathered door. The sound echoed, startling a pair of crows roosting on the porch rail. They flapped off into the dark with irritated calls. For a long moment there was no answer. Lily wondered if Agnes was asleep or simply unwilling to open the door so late. Just as Ben raised his hand to knock again, a faint shuffling sounded from within. The door opened a crack with a drawn-out groan of hinges. Agnes Brewster's face appeared in the sliver of lamplight. Lily's memory of her was of a severe, tall woman with iron-grey hair always tied in a bun. Now that face peered out, etched with confusion and alarm. Agnes's eyes, sharp despite her age, flickered from Ben to Lily and back. Benjamin, Lillian? What on earth? Agnes's voice was soft but firm. She only ever used their full names. Lily suppressed a shiver that was only partly from the cold. Up close in the night, with only a single lamp behind her, Agnes did look a little witch-like. Her nose hooked, casting a long shadow down her cheek, and her hair wild and loose for once around her shoulders. Ben cleared his throat. "Sorry to bother you, Miss Brewster. We thought we saw someone come over onto your property. We just wanted to make sure you were okay." Agnes opened the door a bit wider. She had a thick knitted shawl around her shoulders, and Lily noticed clutched something in her hand, maybe a pendant or locket at her chest. "Someone on my property?" She sounded genuinely surprised. "At this hour? Who?" "We aren't sure," Ben admitted. "Lily saw a woman digging by the stone wall between our places. We came to check, and she ran off this way, we think." Lily expected Agnes to laugh it off or scold them for imagining things. Instead, the old woman's face became very still, her lips pressed tightly together. For a moment, Lily thought she saw a flicker of fear in Agnes's eyes. "You saw a woman?" Agnes asked slowly. "Digging at the wall?" Lily nodded, stepping a little forward. "Yes, it wasn't you, was it? Maybe looking for something. She climbed over onto your side right after." Agnes stood silent for a heartbeat too long. The kitchen light behind her threw her shadow across the porch, where it loomed over Lily and Ben. Then Agnes managed a thin smile. "My dears, I'm far too old to be roaming about at night digging holes. You must have seen a trespasser, though I can't imagine who'd be out here." She glanced over their heads toward the dark fields, worry lines deepening on her forehead. "Are you alone? Do you want us to check around your yard or barn?" Ben offered, shifting his weight. Lily could tell he was trying to sound brave, but there was an edge to his voice. Agnes quickly shook her head. No, that's quite all right. I will check in the morning. I'm sure it's nothing." She paused, then added, "But thank you. It's kind of you to come make sure I was safe." Lily felt a tug of reluctance. Part of her wanted to insist on doing a quick search now, just to be sure that strange woman wasn't lurking somewhere nearby watching them. But at the same time, the idea of prowling around more in the dark made her skin crawl. Ben nodded. "If you're sure, we could stay until morning, keep watch." "That's not necessary," Agnes interrupted gently. "Young man, you have school tomorrow, don't you? And your sister as well. Best you both get home and rest. I'll lock my doors and be perfectly fine." Something about her tone left no room for argument. Ben pressed his lips together, then sighed. "All right. But if you see or hear anything, call us. Or the police." Agnes's stern face softened a fraction. "I will. Now off you go. It's late." Before Lily could ask any other questions, Agnes stepped back and closed the door carefully. The latch clicked, and they were left with only the faint beam of the flashlight and the distant glow of Agnes's lamp through the warped glass window. Ben exhaled a breath Lily hadn't realized he was holding. He looked at her, trying to give a reassuring grin. "Well, she's fine. Maybe it was just an animal or some drifter after all." He didn't sound convinced, and Lily certainly wasn't. She wrapped her arms around herself. "Something was out here, Ben. I wasn't seeing things." He put a hand on her shoulder, squeezing lightly. "I believe you. I saw the dirt too, remember? But whoever it was, they're gone now." He guided her off the porch. "Let's get back. It's freezing." Lily allowed herself to be led away, back through the tangles of tall grass toward the wall and their own property. But she cast one last glance over her shoulder at Agnes's house. Through the wavery glass of the kitchen window, she could see Agnes's silhouette. The old woman hadn't returned upstairs or deeper inside. She stood just behind the thin curtain, perfectly still, watching them go. For a moment, Lily wondered if Agnes was really as calm as she tried to appear. There was something guarded in the way she'd reacted, and that pause when Lily described the figure. Perhaps Agnes was more frightened than she let on, or perhaps she knew more than she was saying. By the time Lily and Ben climbed back over the stone wall onto their own land, the shock of what she'd seen was wearing off, replaced by a heavy exhaustion. The adrenaline that had spiked in her veins was ebbing, leaving her limbs leaden and her mind muddled with questions. They walked silently to the farmhouse. At the door under the yellow porch light, Ben finally spoke again. "Let's not mention this to Mom, okay? Not tonight, at least. No need to worry her." Lily agreed. Julia Wallace had enough to worry about, enough nightmares of her own. The sudden death of their father 3 months ago had shattered her. Julia drifted through each day in a haze, barely aware of her surroundings. The smallest disturbance could set off a panic or a sobbing fit when she was particularly fragile. Telling her that Lily had seen a phantom digger in the yard would do more harm than good. "I won't say anything," Lily promised quietly. Her eyes darted to the dark windows of the second floor, where her mother's bedroom light was off. No sign of movement. Ben nodded, satisfied. "Good. Try to get some sleep, Lily. It's probably nothing." He attempted another reassuring smile, but it looked as tired as Lily felt. As they stepped inside and bolted the door, Lily silently hoped he was right, that it was nothing more than a one-time odd occurrence. But deep down an icy knot had formed in her stomach, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this night was only the beginning of something far worse. Morning light crept through the threadbare curtains of the farmhouse kitchen, painting pale stripes across the worn wooden table. Lily sat in Dad's old chair, a mug of hot cocoa cupped in her hands. Across from her, Julia stood at the stove, stirring a pot of oatmeal with slow, methodical motions. The radio on the windowsill murmured a soft static. Julia had turned it on out of habit, but it wasn't tuned to any station in particular. Lately, Julia seemed to drift through tasks like a sleepwalker, her mind somewhere far beyond the walls of their home. Ben clattered down the stairs, the sound jarring in the otherwise quiet morning. He entered the kitchen, already dressed in jeans and a flannel, his hair still damp from a hurried shower. "Morning," he mumbled. Julia turned her head slightly, offering a wan smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, sweetheart." Her voice was hoarse, as if she hadn't spoken aloud yet today. Lily watched her mother carefully. Julia's brown hair, once always neatly brushed and tied back, hung limp and unkempt. There were faint smudges beneath her eyes. She'd been crying again late into the night, Lily guessed. Sometimes Lily heard the muffled sobs through the thin walls as Julia thought her children slept. "Morning, Mom," Lily offered gently. She wished she could think of something more to say, something that might brighten her mother's expression, but words failed her. Julia turned back to the stove. "I made oatmeal. Plain, but there's honey on the table." It was as if she was apologizing for not making a more elaborate breakfast, the kind she used to make when Dad was alive. Pancakes on Sundays, omelettes with garden vegetables on special occasions. Those days felt far away now. Ben poured himself a mug of coffee from the pot that had been sitting since dawn. He took a sip and made a face. It had gone bitter and lukewarm. "I can make some eggs if you want, Mom," he offered, trying to sound upbeat. Julia shook her head quickly. "No, don't trouble yourself." She left the pot of oatmeal and moved to the cupboard to fetch bowls. Sit, I'll serve you both." As she reached up for the bowls, her hand trembled. One bowl slipped from her grasp and fell to the floor, shattering with a sharp crack against the tiles. Lily flinched, and so did Julia, who stared at the porcelain shards blankly. "Mom!" Lily jumped up, placing her mug down and rushing to her mother's side. "Are you okay?" Julia blinked rapidly as if coming out of a trance. I'm fine. It just slipped." But her voice quivered. Ben was already crouching, picking up the larger pieces carefully. "Don't worry, I got it." He tossed the shards into the trash, then fetched the broom. Julia stood there for a moment, then put the remaining bowl on the counter, pressing a hand to her forehead. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's just a bowl, Mom," Ben said softly as he swept. "No biggie." Lily laid a hand on her mother's back. Julia's shoulder blades were prominent under her thin cardigan. She had lost weight these past months. "Maybe sit down, Mom. We can handle breakfast." Julia yielded without protest. She sank into a chair, her gaze distant. "I didn't sleep well," she admitted after a pause, her fingers worrying a loose thread on her sweater. Strange dreams. Lily shot a quick glance at Ben, who met her eyes. For a second, Lily wondered if Julia had heard them slip out last night or if her dreams were related to what Lily had seen. "About Dad?" Lily asked carefully. Julia's lips parted, then closed. She looked down at her hands. "No, not this time. It was foolish, really. I dreamed I was in the field by the stone wall, looking for something." Her brow furrowed as she spoke. "And I heard your father's voice calling me from the other side of the wall. He sounded so sad. I tried to climb over to reach him, but the wall kept stretching taller and taller." Julia's voice broke off. She gave a shaky laugh, brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I told you it was foolish. Just a dream." Lily felt the hairs on her arms rise. That was no ordinary dream. She forced herself to stay composed, not to alarm her mother with the intensity of her reaction. Instead, she gently took Julia's hand. It was cold, despite the warm kitchen. "It's not foolish, Mom. We all dream about him." Ben finished sweeping and leaned the broom against the counter. "I dreamt about Dad last week," he lied easily. "He was teaching me to drive the tractor like when I was younger. Felt real at the time." Lily could tell he was fibbing to make their mother feel better. Ben hadn't mentioned any such dream to her, and he usually shared those moments of missing Dad. But Julia looked up at him, a faint smile touching her lips. "He loved you both so much," she murmured. "He'd want us to be brave." An awkward silence settled. None of them had an answer to that. Bravery in the face of loss was easier said than done. Lily cleared her throat softly. "The oatmeal will burn." She rose and moved to the stove, taking it off the heat and stirring. It was a bit gluey in texture now. She spooned some into a bowl for her mother and drizzled honey on it, then placed it in front of Julia. "Here you go." Julia stared at the oatmeal as though unsure what to do with it. Ben took the seat next to her and started eating from his own bowl, feigning enthusiasm. Just how I like it. Extra thick." He gave Lily a wink, trying to lighten the mood. Lily managed a small grin back. As they ate in quiet, Lily's mind wandered back to last night's strange encounter. In the daylight, it was tempting to rationalize it away. It could have been some lost camper or a petty thief scoping houses, though there'd been no break-ins reported around here as far as she knew. But Julia's mention of a dream at the wall and hearing Dad's voice sent a chill through her. Could it be connected? Or was it just that their mother's mind was so saturated with grief that her dreams were haunted by Dad? Lily wanted to ask if Julia had noticed anything odd recently, a feeling of being watched or objects out of place, but she held her tongue. Julia was too fragile. Pressing that line of thought might spiral her into anxiety. After breakfast, Ben offered to drive them to school. Normally they took the bus, but he said he had an errand after school in town anyway. Julia had retreated to her bedroom by then with her untouched oatmeal, murmuring about lying down for a bit. Outside, the sky was overcast, a flat grey light making the morning feel later than it was. The siblings got into Ben's old pickup truck, an ancient Ford that had once been their dad's farm truck. It coughed to life after a few tries, and Ben guided it down the gravel lane toward the main road. As they passed the stone wall, Lily peered out the window. In daylight, the wall looked innocuous enough, draped in ivy with mushrooms sprouting at its base. You'd never guess that last night it had been the stage for something uncanny. She saw the disturbed patch of earth and stones where the figure had dug. In the weak morning light, she could also see something she hadn't noticed at midnight, a fragment of fabric caught on one of the rocks. "Ben, stop a sec," she blurted. Ben hit the brakes, the truck skidding a few feet on the gravel. "What? What's wrong?" Lily was already out of the truck, letting the door hang open as she jogged a few paces back along the wall. She approached the oak tree, eyes on that bit of fabric fluttering gently. It was wedged in a crack of the stone wall where a rock had been dislodged. She tugged it free. It was a strip of cloth, about 4 inches long and torn unevenly. The colour had once been white, but now it was caked with mud and what looked like an old reddish-brown stain, rust or blood. Lily's stomach did a little flip. The material felt old, frayed at the edges. It could have been from a dress or a shirt. She thought of the figure's flowing, pale attire. Ben came up behind her, glancing over her shoulder. "What's that?" "It was stuck in the wall," Lily said, handing it to him. "Maybe from the dress I saw that woman wearing?" Ben examined it, but without much enthusiasm. "Could be just some rag that was stuck there for ages. There's all sorts of junk around these old farms." But Lily noticed he pocketed the scrap anyway. She looked across into Agnes's property from where they stood. In the grey morning gloom, the old Brewster house looked lifeless. No smoke from the chimney, no sign of movement. Agnes likely wasn't up and about yet. Lily remembered how Agnes had watched them leave last night from the window. The memory gave her a small shudder, though she wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was the idea that Agnes might have some unspoken knowledge of the night's events. They climbed back into the truck. As they resumed the drive, Lily found herself asking, "Ben, do you think it could have been Agnes's sister?" Ben shot her a puzzled glance. "What?" "You know how people talk in town. They say Agnes had a sister who died or something. Some even said—" Lily hesitated. She had overheard gossip in the past about Agnes's family, fragments of conversation at the grocery store or in church back when they attended regularly. The word witch had come up in more than one hushed exchange, always followed by a laugh or a warning not to spread such foolishness. Ben raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking Agnes's dead sister was out digging at the wall, as in a ghost?" Lily flushed, realizing how silly it sounded out loud. "I don't know. Last night was weird. Mom dreaming about hearing Dad out there was weirder. What if this place is haunted or cursed or something? We don't really know what happened with Agnes's family." Ben was quiet for a moment, eyes on the road. The tyres hummed over the asphalt as they turned onto the main street heading toward town. Dad used to say that was just small-town gossip. Remember? He said Agnes was a nice old lady, just private, and folks made up stories because they didn't understand her. Dad didn't believe in any sort of ghosts, Lily admitted. But Dad also didn't know everything. What if he was wrong? He's not here now. She trailed off. The unspoken end of that sentence was like a weight in the air. Dad's not here now, and something strange is happening. Ben reached over and briefly squeezed her shoulder, keeping his other hand on the wheel. "Look, I don't know what we saw, but let's not jump to ghost stories yet, okay? We'll keep our eyes open. Maybe do a little digging of our own, figuratively. See if we can find out more about Agnes's sister, sure. Just, let's be logical. Could have been a real person." Lily nodded, appreciative that he didn't outright dismiss her. Ben had always been the rational one, the science geek, acing his physics and chemistry classes, yet last night he'd seen enough to take her seriously. They pulled into the gravel lot of Glendale High School, the small combined middle and high school they both attended. The brick building was one of the few large structures in their rural community, and even that was modest. As they got out, Ben said, "After school, I'll swing by the library. I was going to pick up some college prep books anyway. Maybe I can look up town records." "I'll come find you after last period," Lily said eagerly. School was the last thing on her mind, but a thread of excitement, of purpose, wove through her worry now. At least they were doing something. Ben patted the pocket where he'd stashed the cloth fragment. "Keep this between us for now. People will think we're nuts if we start babbling about ghosts." Lily agreed, though part of her itched to tell someone, if only to confirm she wasn't crazy. Still, she knew he was right. She'd confide in her best friend Emma normally, but Emma had a big mouth. By lunchtime, the whole school would hear some warped version of the tale, and soon they'd be a laughingstock or targets for more rumours. As they headed into their separate classrooms, Ben to his senior homeroom, Lily to her freshman one, Lily tried to concentrate on the ordinary noises of school life. Lockers clanging, teachers greeting students, friends chattering about homework or weekend plans. It was jarring how normal everything seemed here, as if the world hadn't shifted slightly on its axis for her last night. During English class, while Mrs. Thompson droned about Romeo and Juliet, Lily found her thoughts drifting back to Agnes's house and that strip of cloth. She imagined a young woman in an old-fashioned white dress roaming the fields by moonlight, her eyes hollow and face half-decayed like a corpse from one of Ben's horror movies. Lily shuddered, scribbling absent-mindedly in her notebook. She wrote witch and wall, and then crossed them out, feeling self-conscious even though no one could see her private notes. At lunch, she sat with Emma and a couple of other girls from her grade, picking at a ham sandwich. Normally they'd gossip about TV shows or complain about an upcoming math test. Today, Lily was quiet. "What's up with you?" Emma finally asked, nudging her. Emma had a spray of freckles and hair the colour of carrots, her personality just as bright. "You look like you saw a ghost or something." Lily's heart gave a jump, and she nearly choked on her water. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Geez, I was joking. You okay?" Catching her breath, Lily forced a laugh. "Yeah, fine. Just didn't sleep well. Weird dreams." Emma grimaced sympathetically. "Ugh, I had one of those too. I dreamed Coach Miller turned into a zombie and was chasing us during gym." She launched into a description that Lily only half heard. A ghost, if only Emma knew. But Lily just nodded along. Perhaps it was better not to share anything until she had a clearer idea of what was going on. When the final bell rang, Lily practically flew out of her seat. She found Ben waiting in the parking lot by his truck. He wasn't alone. His best friend, Josh, was with him, talking animatedly about something. As Lily approached, she caught a snippet of Josh's words. "Craziest thing, man. And then Coach was screaming at us like a bat out of hell." Ben noticed Lily and gave a subtle wave. Josh turned and grinned. "Hey, Lilypad," he teased, using the nickname that always made Lily roll her eyes. "Hi, Josh." She tried to sound pleasant. Normally, Josh was okay in her book, one of the few of Ben's friends who wasn't a jerk to her, but today she had no patience for small talk. Ben must have seen the impatience in her face. He turned to Josh. "Hey, I gotta take Lily to run an errand. Rain check on practice? Tell Coach I had to help with a family thing." Josh shrugged, adjusting his baseball cap. "Sure. Everything cool?" "Yeah, just something for Mom," Ben lied smoothly. "See you tomorrow." They climbed into the truck, and Josh jogged off toward the cluster of athletes by the gym. As soon as they were alone, Lily asked, "Find anything?" Ben started the engine. "Not at the library. They don't keep old newspapers that far back, and the local history section didn't have much on the Brewsters. But I did ask Mr. Olson. Mr. Olson from the History Club?" Lily recalled the name, an elderly volunteer who came to school to help with archival projects. "Yeah, he's lived here his whole life. I figured if anyone remembers stories, it's him." Ben pulled out of the parking lot and headed down Main Street toward the town's small historical society, which doubled as a museum in an old storefront. Lily scooted forward on the bench seat. And what did he say? Ben glanced around to be sure no one was crossing the quiet street, then lowered his voice as though the fields themselves might overhear. He said when he was a kid, people used to whisper that Agnes's little sister was a witch, but not like cackling over a cauldron, more like she could talk to spirits. Olson thought it was just kids telling tales, but then something bad happened. He was fuzzy on the details, said it was a long time ago and he didn't pay attention back then. He remembered a fire at their farm and that Agnes's sister, whose name was Margaret, died. But officially they said it was an accident. Agnes survived, and after that she was alone. Margaret, Lily mouthed the name to herself. It felt oddly significant, like an incantation. Did he say how old the sister was when she died? He thought around our age, maybe a bit older, teenager. This was like in the 1950s or early 60s maybe. He's not sure. Lily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A teenage girl dying tragically could certainly spawn ghost stories, especially in a small town with a penchant for rumours. If Margaret died in a fire, could her ghost be hanging around? That figure I saw, it looked like a woman in a white dress, kind of old-fashioned. Ben didn't answer immediately. He was concentrating on pulling into a parking spot outside the Glendale Historical Society. Only one other car was there, likely Mrs. Potts, the curator. He cut the engine. "I don't really believe in ghosts, Lil, but I'll admit this is weird. It could also be some actual person messing with us. Maybe even Agnes herself playing tricks." Lily frowned. Why would Agnes do that? She seemed genuinely shaken last night, even though she tried to hide it. Ben drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. I don't know. Maybe she's off a rocker. Or maybe someone is trying to scare her or us. I'm just saying we should keep open minds, both supernatural and not. They got out and went inside the Historical Society. The place smelled of mildew and old paper. Dust motes swirled in the slanting afternoon sun from the windows. Mrs. Potts, a plump woman with spectacles, greeted them and was happy to let them browse the old newspaper collection. After 20 minutes of flipping through faded newsprint from the late 50s, Lily found something. Ben, here. He came over to peer at the page she'd spread on the reading table. The headline read, "Barn Fire Claims Brewster Girl 16. The brief article explained a fire had broken out in the Brewster family's barn late one night. By the time it was extinguished, it had spread to part of the farmhouse. 16-year-old Margaret Brewster was found dead inside the barn, believed to have been overcome by smoke. Agnes, her older sister, survived with minor injuries. Their parents were long deceased by that time, no detail given on how. No foul play was suspected, but the cause of the fire was undetermined. It mentioned that some townsfolk tried to reach the farm to help, but by the time they arrived, it was too late. There was a quote from a neighbour about seeing strange lights that night, but it was chalked up to the fire's glow or lightning from a storm that passed through. Lily felt a chill reading it. The facts were mundane enough, but the context made it eerie. So Margaret died in the barn. Fire. Could what I saw be her ghost? Ben ran a hand over his face. Still doesn't explain why now, after all these years. Margaret died like 60-something years ago. If she was a ghost tied to that place, wouldn't Agnes have known or seen signs? Maybe Agnes has seen signs, Lily said quietly. She recalled Agnes's reaction when they told her about the woman at the wall. She definitely seemed to recognize what I described, or at least it sounded familiar to her. Ben tapped the article thoughtfully. The barn. That might be a place to check. If something supernatural is happening, maybe it's originating there. Though I think Agnes would have noticed if her sister's ghost was hanging around her barn for decades. Unless Agnes did something to keep her at bay, Lily mused. Like some ward or ritual. If people believed Margaret was a witch or could talk to spirits, maybe Agnes had to contain her somehow, perhaps behind a wall. She looked at him meaningfully. Ben blew out a breath. That's a stretch, Lily, but if you're hinting what I think, are you suggesting Margaret's body is still behind a wall somewhere? Her grave? The idea formed even as he said it. The article didn't mention a burial or funeral, but presumably Margaret would have been buried in the town cemetery after, unless something odd happened. We should ask Agnes directly, Lily said, already knowing how unlikely that was, but she might not tell us. Ben rubbed the back of his neck. Let's think. If Margaret was really dabbling in weird stuff and a fire happened, maybe the townsfolk were suspicious. Some might have believed it was the result of witchcraft. But if so, why wouldn't they hound Agnes or investigate more? They ruled it an accident officially, it seems. Yeah. Lily folded the newspaper carefully and put it back. She thanked Mrs. Potts, who was squinting at them curiously. 2 teens digging into archives was probably unusual. They left, stepping back out into the late afternoon light. The sun was low, casting long shadows across Main Street. A few storefronts down, the lights in the diner had flickered on, and the smell of fried food wafted toward them on the breeze. Ben checked his watch. We should head home. Mom might wonder where we are. Lily suddenly remembered their mother. Guilt washed over her. Julia expected them home not long after school, and they hadn't told her they'd be late. Granted, Julia often lost track of time these days, but still. They hurried to the truck. As they drove out of town, Lily mulled over their next move. Should they confront Agnes with what they learned, or perhaps approach indirectly? Another thought nagged at her. Julia's dream. Hearing Dad's voice at the wall, what if Margaret's ghost was trying to lure their mother out by imitating Dad? The idea made Lily's skin crawl. She broke the silence. Ben, what if Margaret, or whatever that was, wants something from us? Last night might not be the end of it. Ben's grip on the wheel tightened. If it's truly a ghost, maybe it wants attention, acknowledgement. Some ghosts in stories just want their story known, right? Or remains found, etc. Lily nodded. If she died tragically, maybe she wants justice, but a fire accident, unless it wasn't an accident. Or maybe she just wants company in misery, Ben muttered darkly. I mean, if you were a ghost stuck alone on an old farm for decades, and suddenly a grieving family moves next door. He didn't finish the thought, but Lily knew what he implied. They were vulnerable, their sorrow like a beacon. Perhaps Margaret's spirit, if it was there, sensed kindred pain. We have to protect Mom, Lily said suddenly. If it tried to trick her once with Dad's voice, what if it tries again? Ben's expression hardened. We won't let anything happen to her. Tonight, I think one of us should stay up, keep watch. He glanced at Lily, expecting her to protest, but she agreed instantly. I'll do it. I'm honestly not sure I can sleep anyway. Ben shook his head. I meant me. You have trouble staying awake past midnight. You fall asleep in movies, remember? Despite the tension, Lily almost smiled. I can manage if it's important. Maybe we both should take shifts. All right, he conceded. I can stay up till maybe 2, then you till dawn, or vice versa. They turned onto their long dirt road. Evening was settling in, and the fields around them were awash in dim gold light. As they approached their driveway, they saw something that made them both sit forward in their seats. Julia was outside, standing near the stone wall. Ben cursed under his breath and accelerated down the lane. The truck jostled over ruts, gravel pinging the undercarriage. Lily's heart was in her throat. What was Mom doing out there? They pulled up haphazardly near the side of the house and both leapt out. Mom! Ben shouted, racing toward the wall. Lily was right behind. Julia was in her house slippers and a thin sweater, despite the chill. She was staring at the wall, her back to them. At the sound of Ben's shout, she turned, looking disoriented. Mom, what are you doing? Ben reached her first, placing a hand on her arm. Lily saw their mother's face clearly now in the twilight. Julia's eyes were red like she'd been crying, and she looked pale as a sheet. I thought I heard. Julia shook her head as if confused. It was your father. I heard him calling me from out here again. Lily felt a cold wave roll through her. She exchanged a frightened glance with Ben. It was just in my head, wasn't it? Julia continued weakly. It has to be. He's gone. I know that. I'm just losing my mind. She wrapped her arms around herself. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. I came out before I realized how late it was getting. Ben gently began guiding her back toward the house. It's okay, Mom. You're not losing your mind. We all miss him. His tone was soothing, but Lily could see the fear behind his eyes. If something supernatural was mimicking Dad's voice, then this was no longer just curiosity. It was a threat. Julia allowed herself to be led, but then she paused, looking down at the ground by the wall. What's this? She murmured. With her foot, she nudged at something in the grass. Lily crouched to peer at it, expecting maybe another root or rock. Instead, she saw a small pile of charred wood and ash, mostly scattered. Mixed in were bits of something white and waxy. Ben shone his phone flashlight on it. Candle wax, he said quietly. Lily recognized it too. Someone had burned candles here recently, and the melted wax drippings were evidence. Julia frowned. Have you kids been burning candles out here? There was a slight accusatory edge. Perhaps she thought they had been doing some teenage ritual or morning gesture. No, Lily said, swallowing. She touched one of the wax pieces. It was cold and hardened, but not yet brittle with age. This couldn't have been from long ago. It was recent, possibly last night or even earlier today. Ben looked toward Agnes's property. I bet Agnes did this. Maybe she came out to, I don't know, have a vigil for her sister? Or some kind of warding ritual? Lily recalled Agnes clutching something at her neck the night before. A pendant, perhaps. Maybe Agnes had taken measures after seeing them, like lighting candles at the boundary. Julia looked between them, confused. What are you talking about? Why would Agnes? Lily quickly stood and put an arm around her mother. It's nothing, Mom. Let's get inside. It's chilly. Ben gave a tight nod, and the three of them walked back to the house. Julia was shivering now, whether from cold or emotion. Once inside, Lily steered her mom to the couch and wrapped a blanket around her. Julia seemed exhausted. She sank into the cushions. I'm sorry, she said again softly. I miss him so much. When I hear his voice, even if it's not real, I want to follow it. Lily's throat constricted. She knelt by her mother, taking Julia's hands. We miss him too. But please, if you hear him again, wake one of us. Don't go outside alone, okay?" Julia nodded vaguely, eyes closing. Ben stood nearby, silent and tense. After a moment, Julia's breathing evened out. She had fallen into a doze, drained by the emotional ordeal. Lily stood and motioned for Ben to follow her into the kitchen, out of earshot. Under the warm glow of the kitchen light, Lily finally let out the trembling breath she'd been holding. "It lured her, Ben. Just like I was afraid of." Ben's jaw worked. "I know. We need to stop this before something really bad happens." "We should talk to Agnes," Lily said firmly, keeping her voice low. "She clearly knows something. She was out by the wall with candles, I'm sure of it. Maybe she was trying to protect Mom or us." "Or protect herself," Ben interjected, then held up a hand at Lily's glare. "But yeah, either way, she's involved. We'll go see her, now." Lily glanced toward the living room, where Julia was softly snoring under the blanket. "Mom's out for probably a little while. We can leave her for a few minutes, just to run next door." Ben grabbed his coat and Lily's, handing hers to her. They stepped back out into the dusk, this time heading directly down their side of the wall toward Agnes's house, rather than going around by the road. As they neared the section of wall where Lily had found the cloth earlier, Lily felt a pulsing heaviness in the air, as though the very ground remembered the fire from decades ago. She tried to shake off the sensation. They climbed over the wall where it was lowest and onto Agnes's land. The old farmhouse loomed ahead, dark now, except for that same kitchen window light. A thin plume of smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting Agnes had a fire going inside. They knocked on her door, more urgently this time. "Miss Brewster?" "It's Ben and Lily Wallace," Ben called. There was a long silence. Lily shifted nervously, realizing she hadn't even considered what exactly to say. Demanding answers from the old woman might backfire. They needed her to trust them enough to share the truth. At last, the door opened. Agnes peered out, expression guarded. She had a lantern in one hand instead of using the electric lights, which gave her a sepia-toned appearance, eyes sunken and face lined. "Children, what is it?" Agnes asked, not unkindly but warily. Lily spoke up, trying to sound respectful yet firm. "Miss Brewster, we found candle wax by the wall. We think you were out there, maybe last night or today. Please, we need to know what's happening. My mom, something is calling to her from that wall. You must know something." Agnes's eyes widened slightly. "Your mother heard it?" she whispered. Ben stepped closer to the threshold, though Agnes hadn't invited them in yet. "Yes, she thought it was our dad. We've also seen things. Lily saw someone digging at the wall last night." Agnes closed her eyes as if in pain. She opened the door fully and stepped aside. "Come in. Quickly." They entered. Lily had only been in this house once before, years ago. The smell inside was of burning wood, herbs, and an underlying mustiness. The front room was cluttered with antique furniture, shelves of old books, and dried plants hanging in bunches from the ceiling beams. Agnes led them into the kitchen, where a small fire crackled in an iron stove. The remains of those candles stood on the windowsill. Lily noticed, their stubs melted low. Agnes motioned them to sit at a rough wooden table. She remained standing, the lantern placed in the centre, casting wobbly light around. "I had hoped it would not awaken," Agnes said softly, almost to herself. Lily leaned forward. "You mean your sister's ghost, Margaret?" Agnes flinched at the name, and tears suddenly filled her eyes, transforming her stern face into one of deep sorrow. It was the most emotion either of the siblings had ever seen from her. "So you know about Margaret?" "We read about the fire," Ben explained. "And people in town talked, said she was a witch." Agnes grimaced. "Town gossip," she said bitterly. "Margaret wasn't a witch, not at first. She was just gifted, sensitive to things others couldn't see. After our parents died, those gifts grew dark inside her. She was in so much pain, and the whispers from beyond, they answered her grief." Lily's skin tingled. "What happened the night of the fire?" Agnes sank into a chair finally, as if her legs could no longer hold her. She looked old and tired and heartbroken. "Margaret was trying to perform a ritual. She thought she could bring our parents back from the dead, or at least speak to them. She wouldn't listen to reason. I was a fool. I left her alone in the barn after an argument, thinking she'd cool off. Instead, she lit candles, drew symbols, invited something in. I don't know exactly what went wrong, but the barn caught fire. I ran back and she was trapped inside." Agnes took a shaking breath. I tried to get her out. I did, but it was too late. Part of the roof collapsed and she was burning. Tears slid down the grooves of her cheeks. Lily felt a knot of sympathy and dread. This was even more horrifying than she'd imagined. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Agnes dabbed her eyes with a corner of her shawl. Her voice hardened slightly with guilt. She called to me for help, and I couldn't reach her. The beams fell. I could only watch through a wall of flame as my sister burned alive, and her screams. Agnes choked off the sentence, trembling. Ben looked pale. "That's awful. But what does it have to do with now, with us?" Agnes composed herself with visible effort. "When the flames died, I found her body in the ashes. I should have given her a proper burial, but I was afraid. Afraid of what people would say, and more afraid of what might still be lingering around her. In her final moments, I sensed something unnatural. Perhaps it was the spirit she invoked. Perhaps just her rage and pain." Agnes swallowed. "I sealed her remains where I thought they'd never be disturbed, behind the old stone wall at the edge of our property." Lily gasped softly. "Behind the wall? You mean you literally hid her body in the wall?" Agnes nodded shamefully. "I pried loose stones and buried her there, mixing her ashes into the soil, covering it with rock. I thought if her soul was cursed, or if any evil had clung to her, it would be contained by those stones and the boundary of our land. I never told a soul. The town assumed she died in the fire and was buried quietly, which suited me fine." Ben exhaled in disbelief. All these years, she was there. A cold realization swept over Lily, the place where she saw the figure digging. "She was trying to get out," Lily breathed. "Last night, that woman I saw was digging at the base of the wall, right where you—" Agnes's silence was confirmation enough. Ben stood abruptly, agitated. "Mrs. Brewster, you buried your sister's remains in that wall and never thought to tell anyone. What if someone stumbled on—" "Don't judge what you don't understand, boy," Agnes snapped, then softened, seeing Ben's alarmed face. "I'm sorry. I have lived with that decision my whole life. It was perhaps wrong, but I was terrified. Margaret's presence stayed quiet for decades, or at least if it stirred, it did no harm to anyone, and I did not perceive it clearly. Until your family came." Lily felt a chill. "Because we are grieving, like she grieved?" Agnes turned sad eyes to her. "Yes, child. Grief can be like an open door. Margaret's spirit sensed kindred sorrow in your home, and when your pain called out, she answered. She tricked my mom, pretending to be my dad," Lily said, voice shaking with anger now. Agnes nodded gravely. "A cruel tactic. Margaret's spirit is twisted by suffering. She thinks if she can lure others into despair, she won't be alone in it. Perhaps even she believes she's doing them a favor, reuniting them with their dead. But really, it's a curse." Ben paced by the table, fists clenched. "How do we stop her? How do we keep our mom safe?" Agnes stared into the lantern flame. "I have tried to quiet Margaret's spirit since last night. I lit blessed candles, said prayers by the wall, but she grows stronger, feeding off your family's grief. Containing her is no longer enough. She must be confronted." "What does that mean? Exorcism? Another ritual?" Lily asked. Agnes got up slowly and went to a cupboard. She retrieved a small leather-bound journal. When she returned, she handed it to Lily. The journal looked ancient, the pages yellowed and covered in dense writing and strange symbols. This was Margaret's grimoire, her spellbook, if you will. I salvaged it from the barn after the fire. I kept it hidden, hoping to forget it, but perhaps something inside can tell us how to put her spirit to rest. Ben took the book gently from Lily's hands and flipped it open. The handwriting was hard to read, interspersed with Latin and other languages. He shook his head. "This could take time to decipher." "We don't have much time," Lily said in a hushed tone. "She's already trying to lure Mom. And what if Margaret tries to hurt someone directly or possess?" As that word left Lily's lips, an urgent banging sounded from Agnes's front door, startling them all. Ben rushed to open it. Lily's heart sank when she saw who stood there, breathless and wild-eyed. It was Julia. "Mom?" Lily ran to her. "What's wrong?" Julia looked between Lily, Ben, and Agnes with confusion and a hint of anger. "What are you kids doing over here? I woke up and you were gone. I got worried." She cut herself off, swaying slightly on her feet. Ben reached to steady her. Julia's face was ashen. "I heard voices. I thought I heard you screaming," she said weakly. "I came to make sure you were all right." "We're okay, Mom. "We're sorry," Ben said quickly. "We just needed to talk to Miss Brewster." Julia looked at Agnes, and Lily saw fear flash in her mother's eyes. Perhaps it was the disorienting setting, or maybe Julia had heard the rumours too, and in her frazzled state felt uneasy around the neighbour. Talk to her? About what? Lily opened her mouth, struggling to come up with a soothing lie, but Agnes spoke first. "Julia, dear, come sit down. You look faint." Agnes stepped forward with surprising grace for her age and took Julia by the arm, guiding her to a chair. Julia allowed herself to be seated, confusion knitting her brow. I should be going. The kids need supper and—" "You must listen," Agnes interjected firmly, kneeling in front of Julia and holding her hands. "I have to tell you something about my sister and this land. It concerns your family's safety." Julia blinked rapidly as if trying to clear her head. "Your sister?" Ben gave Lily a worried look, but Lily nodded slightly. Maybe it was time to tell Mom the truth. They needed her to understand so she would be cautious and maybe even help. Agnes, with quiet earnestness, explained to Julia in a gentler version the tale of Margaret's restless spirit. Lily watched her mother's face for a reaction. Julia went from bafflement to disbelief to dawning horror as Agnes recounted the events and what had happened in recent nights. When Agnes described how Margaret called out in the voices of lost loved ones, Julia jerked her hands away and stood. "Stop," she whispered, tears brimming. "Are you saying that wasn't really my husband's voice I heard? That it was some ghost trying to trick me?" Lily approached carefully. "Mom, we just want you to be safe. We're going to handle this, I promise." Julia pressed a hand to her mouth, anguish in her eyes. "Richard," she sobbed softly. I thought maybe." She couldn't finish. Lily wrapped her arms around her mother, and Julia clung to her. Ben cleared his throat. "Miss Brewster is going to help us put a stop to this. We have Margaret's book here." Julia pulled back from Lily, looking at Ben and then Agnes with desperation. "Is this real, or am I having some kind of breakdown?" "It's real, Julia," Agnes said quietly. "And you are not crazy. Your husband's spirit isn't haunting you. It's my sister, and for that I am so terribly sorry." Julia wiped her tears, her expression hardening into something Lily had not seen since before Dad died, determination. She drew a shaky breath. "What do we need to do?" Lily felt a surge of relief and pride in her mother's courage. Julia wasn't retreating into denial or despair. She was choosing to fight for them. Ben placed the grimoire on the table. "We have to figure out how to put Margaret to rest, or banish her, or something, before she hurts Mom or anyone else." Agnes nodded. "Typically, one must locate the remains and either bless or destroy them properly, but her ashes are scattered in that wall. Perhaps we could gather what's left and do a proper burial in consecrated ground." Julia spoke up, voice still wobbly but resolute. "If she's been woken up, will she let us just do that?" As if in answer, a sudden whump sounded against the side of the house, rattling a window pane. Everyone tensed. "Perhaps we should continue this in the morning," Agnes whispered. "It's after sunset now. She's stronger at night." Ben shook his head. "She's active now. Maybe that means this is our chance to end it, confront her when she's present." Another impact shuddered the house, and a distant wailing moan drifted through the air. Lily's blood ran cold at the sound. Half-human cry, half-howling wind. Agnes quickly grabbed a pouch from a shelf and scattered a line of salt across the threshold of the kitchen door and windows. "This will keep her from entering, for a time at least. But outside—" Julia stood, trembling but firm. "That thing is out there? My God." Lily moved to the window and peeled back the edge of a curtain. In the gloom outside, she could just make out a shape moving erratically near a gnarled apple tree in Agnes's front yard. It looked like a pale figure, twitching and jolting as if with broken bones. Lily let the curtain fall, her heart pounding. "She's out there." Ben handed Julia a flashlight from a side table. To Agnes he said, "Do you have any weapons or something to defend ourselves if it comes to that?" Agnes opened a drawer and took out a hefty old revolver. "I pray we won't need this. Bullets can't kill a spirit, but sometimes iron can disrupt them, at least." She also retrieved a long iron fireplace poker, pressing it into Ben's hands. "Cold iron. Old remedy against the fae and spirits. It's worth a try." Lily felt surreal. Just this morning she was eating oatmeal in a quiet kitchen, and now she was arming herself against a ghost. Her hands shook as she took an iron candlestick Agnes offered her as a makeshift club. Julia was murmuring something to herself, perhaps a prayer, as she accepted a canister of salt from Agnes. "Stay together," Agnes instructed. "We will go to the wall. I suspect that's where she'll be strongest, near her remains." It struck Lily that Agnes, for all her sorrow, was very brave. The old woman squared her shoulders, a fierceness in her eyes now as she opened the door, lantern in one hand, revolver in the other. The night air was frigid and still. The four of them walked in a tight cluster toward the stone wall. The lantern's glow cast dancing shadows around them. Julia held the flashlight, its beam jittery in her shaking hand, adding to the light. They had barely made it halfway to the wall when a piercing shriek tore through the silence. The sound was unearthly, sending a flock of birds exploding from the trees in a frenzy. Lily's instinct was to cover her ears, but she held on to the candlestick with both hands, knuckles white. At the edge of the lantern's light, a figure appeared. Margaret's ghost stepped forward, and Lily finally saw her clearly. It was indeed a young woman, her form translucent and flickering. She wore what looked like a nightdress or slip, the fabric stained with soot and burns. Her hair hung in wild tangles. The most horrifying was her face. One side looked normal, even pretty, with a dark eye and half a fair cheek. The other half was charred black, skin cracked and weeping an impossible smoke, as if she were still burning. Her eyes fixed on Agnes first, then moved to Julia, and an expression of hungry longing twisted what remained of her features. "Agnes." The spirit spoke, voice a crackling hiss. "You came, and you brought me more souls to keep me company." Agnes lifted the revolver, voice steady. "Margaret, release yourself from this world. You do not belong here anymore." The apparition's ruined mouth curled into a sneer. "Sister, you left me alone in the dark for so long. Now you tell me to leave. No, not until I have what I want." Her form flickered closer without moving her legs, as if the wind carried her. Lily and the others instinctively stepped back. Julia surprised Lily by speaking up, her voice trembling but loud. "Margaret, I'm sorry for your pain, but we're not your enemies. We just want peace." Margaret's ghost cocked her head, burnt hair crackling as it moved. "Peace? I burn. I burn forever. There is no peace." The last word came out as a banshee wail that made Lily's eyes water from its intensity. Then, with terrifying swiftness, Margaret lunged at Julia, arms outstretched. Her fingers were blackened bone in parts, and they swiped through the space where Julia stood. Julia cried out and stumbled back. Though the ghost's hand passed through her chest without physical impact, Julia collapsed to her knees, gasping, as if the very touch had stolen her breath or will. "No!" Ben shouted. He rushed between Julia and the ghost, swinging the iron poker. It whooshed through Margaret's form. She recoiled, not hurt, but thwarted, hissing in anger. Agnes stepped forward next to Ben, cocking the revolver with a shaky hand and firing. The gunshot rang out deafeningly loud. The bullet, made of lead, went straight through the spectre's chest and buried in a tree beyond. It did nothing tangible, but Margaret's form wavered, the edges of her flickering wildly. Perhaps the iron content or the force gave her pause. "Lily, the salt!" Agnes yelled. Lily snapped out of her terror and fumbled with the lid of the salt canister Julia had carried. Her mother had dropped it when she fell. Lily took a fistful of coarse salt crystals and flung them at the ghost. The grains sparkled through the air, and where they struck Margaret's form, little plumes of smoke sizzled. Margaret shrieked, momentarily drawing back toward the wall. Lily rushed to Julia's side as her mother struggled up, coughing and clutching her chest. "Mom, are you okay?" "Mom!" Julia nodded weakly, leaning on Lily. She was inside my head." Her voice. Julia shuddered violently. Ben kept the ghost at bay, jabbing with the iron poker any time the figure drifted forward. Agnes emptied 2 more shots, each making Margaret writhe and rage, but not vanishing. The ghost's visage twisted with hatred. "You cannot send me back. Not after the door was opened. I will take her." She pointed a scorched finger at Julia. "She will join me in the dark. She will know my pain." With that, Margaret's form suddenly billowed like smoke and shot upward, disappearing among the skeletal branches of the oak by the wall. "Did we drive her off?" Lily panted, helping Julia stand fully. Agnes looked around warily. "I don't think so. That cry, she's summoning something." All around them the night fell eerily silent. Even the crickets hushed. Ben lifted the flashlight, casting the beam around in an arc. Lily kept a tight grip on Julia, ready to drag her out of the way if needed. A sound broke the silence, a crack like wood splitting. Then another. Lily looked at the wall. In the lantern light, she saw stones beginning to shift. "She's breaking the wall," Ben shouted. Indeed, the very stones Agnes had laid decades ago to entomb her sister were now trembling. As if pried by invisible hands, one rock dislodged and fell, then another. The wall started to collapse from the centre, spilling out earth and rock. And something else. An eerie light leaked from the gaps, a sickly greenish glow. "We have to finish this," Agnes said with grim resolve. She marched toward the collapsing section of wall, lantern held high. Ben followed close, still brandishing the poker. Lily helped Julia follow as best as she could. When they reached the wall, half of it had fallen, revealing a hollow space within the base of the oak's roots. Lily's heart almost stopped at the sight. Nestled in the dirt was a partially burned human skull and bones, blackened from fire yet still recognizably human. Margaret's earthly remains. The ghost materialized above those remains, hovering. The skull beneath glowed faintly with the same unearthly light. It was as if the spirit was drawing power directly from her long-buried bones. Agnes raised the last of her salt and sprinkled it in a circle around the open grave, chanting something under her breath. Lily caught fragments. Rest in peace. Tormented soul. Release. Margaret shrieked again, and the wind began to whip, extinguishing the lantern. In the darkness, the glow from the skull intensified, casting grotesque shadows. Ben handed the flashlight to Lily and lunged forward to grab something from the ground. Lily saw it was an old can of kerosene, perhaps left near Agnes's shed. He splashed it towards the hollow and the bones, dousing them with the flammable liquid. Realizing his intent, Lily fumbled in her pocket for matches. Agnes had given her a small box along with the candles earlier. She struck one just as the ghost swooped down toward them. "Lily, do it now!" Ben yelled. Lily tossed the lit match into the hollow. For a split second, she saw Margaret's ghostly eyes widen in fear. Or was it release? Then a whoosh of fire erupted as the kerosene caught. Flames roared up, enveloping the bones in bright orange heat. The reaction was immediate and violent. Margaret's ghost let out a wail so piercing Lily screamed and dropped to her knees, hands over her ears. In the firelight, the spectre writhed, flames reflecting in her translucent form. She reached out desperately toward Agnes, then Julia, but could not approach. The ring of salt and the inferno held her back. Agnes, tears streaming, cried out over the roar of flame. "Be free, Margaret. Let go of this world, please." For a moment, the ghost's face seemed to soften. The hatred and anguish flickered into something like regret. She looked at Agnes with hollow eyes, and her lips formed a single word silently, "Sorry." Then, with a final keening moan, Margaret's form was drawn into the fire, as if sucked in by a vortex. The flames flared impossibly high, then abruptly guttered low. The wind died. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the remaining fire as it consumed the bones. The greenish glow faded, replaced by ordinary orange firelight. Lily realized she was sobbing only when she felt Julia hugging her tightly, both of them shaking. "Is it over?" Lily whispered. Ben cautiously prodded the skull with the iron poker. The bones crumbled into ash under the touch. There was no reaction except the collapse of the fragile burnt bone. Agnes was weeping openly, whether in sorrow or relief or both. "She's gone," the old woman said. "At last, she's gone." They stood in a daze around the smouldering pit where the wall had been. The fire was dying down on its own, having consumed the kerosene and what little dry material remained of Margaret's bones. Julia broke from Lily and moved toward Agnes. To Lily's astonishment, her mother put her arms around the elderly neighbour, drawing her into an embrace. Agnes stiffened in surprise, then accepted the comfort, crying into Julia's shoulder. Ben came to Lily's side. He looked exhausted and emotionally wrung out. In the distance, they could hear a siren. Perhaps someone had reported the gunshots or the fire. But at that moment, none of it mattered. Lily looked at the sky. The stars were beginning to reappear as the black smoke dissipated. She let out a long breath she felt she'd been holding for days. "It's over," Ben echoed softly, putting an arm around his sister. Lily wasn't sure if he was trying to reassure her or himself, but she allowed herself to believe it. Margaret's tortured soul was finally at rest, and their family, though still broken by grief, was safe from her haunting. Dawn broke over the Glendale countryside with a gentle hush. A week had passed since that terrifying night, and in the early morning light the world looked almost unchanged. The fields still blanketed in dew, the oak tree by the stone boundary standing silent guard. But for Lily, everything felt different. She walked along the edge of their property, where the old stone wall had partially collapsed. In the daylight, the scorch marks on the ground were visible, a dark scar upon the earth. Lily and Ben had helped Agnes a few days ago to rebuild the wall, stone by stone, leaving one section as a makeshift memorial. There, under the oak's sprawling branches, they had buried the small urn containing the last of Margaret's ashes. Julia had insisted on coming with them for that task. Together, with a local pastor murmuring a quiet blessing, they laid Margaret Brewster to rest in consecrated ground at the base of the tree. Agnes had placed a single white lily on the fresh soil. Ben had quietly tucked the mud-stained scrap of white cloth they'd found into the urn before burial, returning it to Margaret at last. Now Lily bent down and traced a finger over a rough chunk of granite in the wall that bore a simple carving. M.B., Margaret's initials. Ben had etched them there as a marker when Agnes said she didn't want a formal gravestone. The older woman felt her sister had caused enough disturbance. A humble marker was sufficient. A cool breeze whispered through the grass, carrying the smell of wet leaves and wood smoke from Agnes's morning hearth fire. Lily closed her eyes and listened. No voices, no cries, just the rustle of leaves and a distant crow. The silence was soothing, normal. Footsteps crunched on gravel behind her. Lily turned to see Julia approaching, bundled in her coat and scarf against the autumn chill. Her mother's face was drawn but calm. "Couldn't sleep?" Julia asked softly as she came to stand beside Lily. Lily shrugged lightly. "I wanted to check on this." She nodded to the rebuilt wall and the mound of dirt with the lily, now wilted on top. Julia slipped an arm around Lily's shoulders. They hadn't had many quiet moments to talk about everything that happened. In the aftermath, there were questions from the local police and fire department about the commotion. Agnes had explained it away as an accident with an old kerosene lamp near the wall that caused a brush fire. The sheriff accepted the story, and the case was closed. Gossip still spread in town, of course. Some neighbours whispered about strange noises that night, or why the Wallaces and Agnes Brewster were all out by the wall so late, but none could guess the truth. "I keep thinking about her," Julia admitted, her gaze on Margaret's initials, about how lonely and hurt she must have been. Lily leaned her head against her mom. "I know, me too." She hesitated, then added, "I also think about how easily that could have been us, you or me or Ben, if we let grief consume us." Julia's arm tightened around her. "I almost did, didn't I? I let it lure me out there. I'm so sorry, Lily. I almost left you and Ben." Her voice hitched. Lily turned and hugged her mother fully. "It wasn't you, Mom. She was manipulating you. But I'm so glad you're still here. We need you." They held each other amid the soft sounds of morning. Julia sniffed and pulled back, offering a faint smile. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetie. I promise." There was a new steadiness in Julia's eyes. She had faced something unspeakable and come through it. The realization seemed to have rekindled a protective resolve in her. "I know," Lily replied, smiling back. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope that their mother was truly coming back to them, not the ghost of her former self, but a woman tempered by tragedy and healing slowly. Ben's voice called from the house porch, breaking the moment. "Hey, breakfast is almost ready. You guys want eggs or not?" Julia chuckled quietly. The sound warmed Lily's heart. Hearing her mom laugh, even a little, was like the first birdsong after a long winter. "We'd better go in before he burns something." They walked arm in arm toward the farmhouse. As they neared the porch, Lily glanced back over her shoulder one last time at the oak tree and the wall. The shadows beneath the tree were shrinking in the growing light. In those shadows, she almost thought she saw a figure standing, a girl in a pale dress watching them. Lily blinked, and the illusion was gone. It was only the play of light and leaves. A part of Lily would probably always wonder if Margaret's spirit truly found peace. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, she still caught herself listening for odd scratches in the walls or distant crying on the wind. She suspected Julia and Ben did the same. Trauma, like grief, leaves echoes that don't fade overnight. Inside the house, the smell of frying eggs and toast greeted them. The kitchen was brightly lit, the radio in the corner playing a soft country tune. Ben was at the stove poking at a frying pan. He looked up with a theatrical sigh of relief. Finally, I was about to eat both portions myself. "Not on your life," Lily quipped, mustering playful sass as she slid into a chair. Julia kissed Ben's cheek, then started pouring coffee for herself. Another small sign of normalcy returning, as she'd avoided coffee for months, saying it jangled her nerves. They ate together, chatting lightly about little things. The repairs needed on the barn roof before winter, the math test Lily had tomorrow, the stray cat that Julia had seen hanging around the garden. It felt almost like an ordinary morning from before Dad's accident, except one chair at the table was still empty. After breakfast, Julia cleared her throat. "I have something for you both." She left the room briefly and returned with a wooden box. Lily recognized it. It was Dad's old memory box where he kept sentimental items. Julia opened the box, and right on top was a photograph of their father, Richard Wallace, with all of them at a past summer picnic. They were all smiling, squinting in the sun, arms around each other. Julia's eyes glistened as she slid the photo out and placed it on the table. "I thought maybe we should put this up somewhere again." She gently smoothed a thumb over Richard's face in the picture. "I took down some photos after it happened. It hurt too much to see them every day, but I realize now hiding him from sight wasn't the answer." Ben nodded slowly, reaching over to take the photo. "Thanks, Mom." His voice was thick. Lily felt her own throat tighten as she saw her dad's easy grin captured on paper. Julia also pulled out Dad's old pocket watch, the one he'd gotten from his father. It had stopped on the day of his death, stuck at 3:15. She set it next to the photo. "Maybe we can get this fixed," she said softly. "It's time we got things working again." Lily understood the deeper meaning behind those words. They weren't just talking about a watch. Mother and children exchanged a look of mutual understanding and love. Later that morning, Agnes Brewster came by. Lily saw her walking up the drive and ran to open the door. Agnes looked frail but peaceful. The tension and fear that had once pinched her features were gone, replaced by a gentle, sad smile. She carried a basket with jars of homemade jam and preserves, a thank-you gift. Julia invited her in for tea. They all sat together in the living room, a scene that would have seemed unbelievable just weeks ago, the witch neighbour and the Wallaces sharing a quiet visit. Agnes thanked them for helping free Margaret's soul. "I owe you more than I can ever repay," she said, patting Lily's hand with her thin, cool one. "You gave my sister a chance at peace, and you protected each other. You have a fine family." We couldn't have done it without you," Ben replied earnestly, "and I'm sorry we ever believed the gossip." Agnes shook her head. "There's no need for apologies. I let myself live as a bitter old recluse for too long. Perhaps I earned some of that gossip, but I think it's time I try to live again too, whatever years I have left." The visit was brief but warm. When Agnes left, Julia promised to bring her some fresh bread later, and Agnes invited Lily to help her in the spring planting when the time came. It was a tentative, newfound friendship born out of the horrors they survived together. That night, Lily went up to her room, feeling lighter than she had in months. On her wall, above her desk, she had taped the family picnic photo. Dad's smiling face was the last thing she looked at before turning off the light. She whispered, "Good night, Dad," feeling a comforting sense that somehow, somewhere, he heard her. As she climbed into bed, the events of the past week drifted in her mind. The ghostly figure by the wall, the bone-chilling shrieks, the fire-lit confrontation under the oak tree. It felt almost like a nightmare now, the kind that leaves one shaken but grateful to wake up. Almost. Lily's eyes grew heavy, but just as she was about to slip into sleep, a faint sound made them snap open. It was a soft scritch-scratch, as if something was touching the wall near her headboard. Her heart gave a single hard thump. She held her breath and listened. Scritch. Scratch. It was exactly the noise she had heard in nights after Dad died, when grief kept her half awake and imagining things. She had always assumed it was just mice in the walls or tree branches. Now every nerve in her body lit with alarm. Slowly, Lily sat up and clicked on a bedside lamp. The golden light chased away the murky corners of her room. The sound stopped. Lily's eyes darted over every shadow. Nothing moved. She mustered her courage and swung her legs out of bed, feet hitting the cool floor. The house was silent, aside from the familiar ticking of the hallway clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Lily crept to the wall and placed her palm against the floral wallpaper. It was cool and solid. "Margaret," she whispered, feeling a little foolish. Of course there was no answer. Margaret was gone. Lily exhaled slowly. It was just the house settling, or perhaps a tree branch after all. She considered waking Ben. His room was right next door, but she knew he'd spent too many nights on edge already. Better to let him sleep. As she returned to bed, Lily reminded herself of what Agnes had said at the burial. Margaret's unrest had been laid to rest with her bones. The dead, once properly honoured, had no reason to linger in this world. Still, as Lily reached to turn off the lamp, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the dark window glass. For an instant, it looked like someone was standing behind her in the room, a pale face over her shoulder. Lily's heart leapt into her throat and she whirled around. Nobody was there. The closet stood open a crack. Her desk chair faced her, empty. It was just her mind playing tricks, she told herself firmly, the residue of fear that would take time to wash away. She settled back under the covers and left the lamp on this time. Eventually, her racing heart calmed and her eyelids grew heavy once more. Just before she finally drifted off, she thought she heard a woman's faint voice sigh from beyond the wall. It might have been the wind skimming over the roof, or the memory of a dream. Lily chose to believe it was only that. Downstairs, the hallway clock chimed midnight. Julia stirred in her sleep, a frown crossing her face, but then she rolled over and slumbered on. In his room, Ben dreamed peacefully of a summer day and a picnic with his family, unaware of the slight chill that swept through the hall. Outside, the oak tree branches rustled, though there was no breeze. The night was calm and still. The old stone wall stood intact once more, guarding the boundary. And beneath the earth, a lily flower withered on Margaret Brewster's grave as the last remnants of an old sorrow finally faded into the dark, leaving only whispers. The kind one could almost imagine, if inclined, to be the sound of someone softly crying or perhaps softly laughing, just behind the solid comfort of the wall. Life at the Wallace farmhouse slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, touched forever by what they had endured, but no longer overshadowed by it. The dead had found peace, and the living had found each other again. In the silence that followed, they learned that some walls are meant to protect, not just from what lies beyond, but from what lingers within. Some spirits don't seek revenge, only to be remembered.
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained, and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.